Okay, I think we are going to go ahead and get started now. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Future-Proof Your QA Strategy, Tomorrow's Open Test Architecture. My name is Amy Huey, and I am on the marketing team here at SmartBear, and I am joined by Prashant Mohan, Product Manager for TestComplete. Hi, Prashant.
Hi, Amy. Thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Prashant, and I'm the Product Manager of TestComplete.
Great. And so just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded and it will be sent to everyone within the next couple days. If you do have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A panel rather than the chat box. We won't really be monitoring the chat that closely, so definitely go ahead and put your Q&A or questions in the Q&A box. And then we do also have a few poll questions for you throughout the session. It helps us tailor the presentation to what interests you guys. So we would really appreciate your input on those. And so with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Prashant.
All right. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, everyone, once again for joining. A couple of things we will talk about in the next hour or so. We'll start with a general overview of some of the things we think that you should look for in a test automation tool. Some of the characteristics of a flexible test automation framework. And I think the most important and the most exciting part is a demonstration of how TestComplete fits into three key workflows that you most probably have. So we'll go over traditional test management integration in your continuous integration pipeline, a BDD workflow, and also a little bit about testing on complex web applications. And finally, the last 5 minutes or so, I'll spend on talking about how we think about building features in TestComplete itself, and give you an idea of some of the strategies and methodologies that we use in order to build a powerful test automation framework that you can use to test your applications. All right, so a little bit about us. So we're SmartBear. We were founded about 10 years ago in 2009, spread across 11 global offices. We build tools across the software development lifecycle that are used by more than 6.5 million users. These users are from more than 22,000 different organizations and companies. So we're very, very glad to have such a widespread community of users. We have several open source offerings, SOAP UI and Swagger, you may have already heard of. And most recently, we acquired a Cucumber that follows the BDD paradigm. So that's another open source tool in our portfolio. And to make this all happen, we have more than 525 people working very hard every day to make sure that your software and automation goals are being met. So vision is very simple. We just want to help organizations like you manage, design, test, and monitor everything from your code, applications, and processes across the entire software development lifecycle. Now, to visually represent this and showcase where some of our tools fit in that software development lifecycle, we have tools ranging from design with our hip test and Swagger Hub offering to the test aspect. So there's two layers of testing. There's the UI layer or the API layer. So we have several products that cater to each one of those layers. And finally, when you do go into production, you need to be able to monitor your application. So we have a tool called AlertSite that essentially monitors everything that happens in production. And an overarching aspect of our portfolio is test management, which our newly acquired tool called Zephyr takes care of. And we also have a code review tool called Collaborator. But for this specific demo and webinar, we will focus on our flagship UI testing tool called TestComplete. All right, so just taking a step back and understanding the typical automation tester's challenge, right? So we know there's hundreds, if not thousands, of tools out there, depending on the people, processes, the existing toolkits that you have, and it's just a very wide ecosystems of tools. So where do you start, right? So the good thing about SmartBear and TestComplete is that we try to play with any tool set or any ecosystem that you may have. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today is basically validates that fact and allows you not to change your processes, but to adopt a tool that aligns with your objectives. All right, so just a couple of things I want to go over before we deep dive into the tool itself, right? It's what do we look for in a test automation tool as we embark on this journey of test automation? What are some of the things that we look for essentially? Now, before we get into this, we want to do a quick poll to understand what type of applications you test. So if you can go ahead and fill that poll that just popped up, that would be great. Give it a couple more seconds. All right. So thank you so much for your answers. So why we ask that question is because the first thing that you do look for an automation tool, essentially, what type of application are you testing? Right? And these range most typically from desktop, web, and mobile applications. We're also seeing the advent of the Chromium embedded framework that's slowly but steadily picking up steam that essentially bridges the gap between web application and desktop application. The second thing that you look for is what kind of technical skill set do you have in your team? Is your team just moving from manual to automation, in which sometimes record and playback feature is more convenient? Or are you already accustomed to using some sort of scripting or programming language in which essentially you need an IDE to develop your test automation scripts? The layer that you test on is also important, right? There's no one layer that you should test on. It's important to test both at the UI and the API layer. Remember that we expect that you already have covered the unit test layer of your application testing. So beyond that, you have two other layers that you need to test on, and both work in conjunction. Once your test executes and runs, you always need reports to make sure that you're able to share that with your managers and the larger team. It's important to know the status of the testing activities that go on. So your tool must be able to offer reporting capabilities out of the box. Continuous integration and continuous deployment is slowly becoming mainstream. It is no longer a nice to have. Your tool must integrate with your existing development ecosystem. And this is generally to encourage test automation engineers, the testing teams in general, to work in conjunction with the development teams so that everything is seamless and quick, and there's no siloed work efforts that's happening. There's essentially two modes of how your testing team could operate, or your team in general could operate, is that you use the traditional test management tool or a more modern BDD approach. Now, there's no one way of doing this. We've seen both being very successful for different teams. So, but the toolkit that you do choose for your test automation should be able to work with either one of these testing methodologies. Parallel testing is also very important, right? You need to increase your time to market, and for that you cannot afford to run tests one by one. You need to be able to either run on virtual machines in parallel, or through a cloud farm that can give you access to devices, configurations, and platforms on demand. And finally, cost, right? This is something that we always look at, right? It's not usually the first thing that we evaluate. It's not the first criteria, but it is it is an important criteria. So you don't want to be spending too much on your tool, and you're looking for as much value as you can get from the tool set that you decide to incorporate. All right, so just to put everything in perspective and uh, to develop some sort of a framework for your test automation, we came up with a diagram that you can use as a platform for when you are building your test automation framework or the tool set that you decide to use. So as we spoke about before, the application type is generally the first thing that you look at while picking a tool or a framework. The persona of people in your team. So from manual testers to seasoned developers, looking for something that can support everything and everyone in your team, no matter what the skill set is. Also, once you decide on the application type itself, you're looking at what type of technologies does this tool support. So it's so web-based technology is generally the thing that we look at. But there's other technologies as well. So you have .NET, WPF, Java-based applications. You have Dev Express, which is becoming more common. And you have other complex applications like PDFs that you might need testing as well. So you're looking for a tool that could support most, if not all, of these technologies in one shot, because you really don't want to use a different testing framework or a different tool for each one of these technologies. And so when it comes to the actual work itself, there's essentially three things that a test automation engineer does. Right? So they create their tests, they maintain their tests on a day-to-day basis, and you execute them across different environments. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each one of them. So we spoke about the application layer that you're testing on. So with respect to the UI layer, object recognition is very important. The tool must be able to recognize objects in the most straightforward way possible. We think that the property-based method of recognizing object is the most robust, but in many cases, property-based recognition just doesn't work because the application is too complex or your properties are too dynamic, and so it just makes maintenance really heavy. So we also encourage you to use visual methods of recognition, and we'll show you that in one of our demos today. And you also need to test at the API layer, right? So REST and SOAP are the most widely used API standards. So API testing is also very important. And there's two modes there. One is to validate the API itself, and the other way is to test through the API. So sometimes, for example, if you're testing a shopping cart, for example, so you don't have to interact with the UI through the entire workflow. Sometimes you can just fire up an API and get to a point where you can then validate on the UI as a final step. So the test creation aspect is why there's many different types of tests. There's different methods of creating tests. So if you're a manual tester just moving into automation, you might find the record and playback and the keyword-driven framework a more straightforward way to get started. We find that once you get to a certain level, say about 70 to 80% of the way using record and playback, you want to also get comfortable scripting because it just gives you that flexibility of satisfying more complex use cases with your automation tool. So some of the common languages that we see in the test automation world are JavaScript, Python, and VBScript. The tool should be able to easily trigger some API calls, making easy, quick requests that then helps you navigate through the application. And then you need to be able to data drive your tests, right? To increase your coverage, you need to be testing on different types of data sets. So you should be able to connect easily to a database, to an Excel sheet or CSV file. And finally, if you're incorporating BDD in your process, the tool must be able to understand the Gherkin language, a simple given, when, then statement, and be able to convert that into step definitions that you can then execute and run as part of your testing suite. Once you do create your tests, we have this concept of objects. Now these objects may change depending upon your application under test. So you don't want to hard code these objects to each script. You want to keep that as an independent entity so that your maintenance activities become just easier and just more straightforward down the line. And if your application does change, the tool must be able to give you an intelligent way of saying, "Hey, the application's changed. Should we update the properties?" So those are some things that help you in your maintenance activities. And after execution, you want to be able to have all your reports in one place, including snapshots and videos and detailed logs of everything that happens during the automation process. And then finally, you want to export them either as an ICHTML file that you can share with your colleagues, or a JUnit file that you can then consume into your own custom reporting tool if you have one. So as you're executing your tests, it's not sufficient to just execute tests in one environment. So you want to be able to do it across different browsers, different devices, different Windows environments. And also a critical aspect of the tool is whether the tool is extensible or not, right? So if you use a CI tool, you generally try to call the tool through its command line interface or a REST API. So you want the tool to be open and flexible so that you can call and run the tests from any platform. And finally, the tool has to integrate into your existing ecosystem in the most seamless way possible. Right? On the far left, we have our own set of testing tools. So CVT is our cross-device, cross-platform device farm that we have in the cloud. So you can test on different configurations. HipTest is our collaborative BDD tool. Zephyr is our test management tool, and SoapUI Pro is our flagship API testing tool. And then we have other very common tools such as Jira, Git, Jenkins, Docker, Selenium, Cucumber, and many other tools that generally reside in your ecosystem. All right. All right, so let's deep dive into the workflows themselves, because we've spoken many things at a very high level, right? So now let's deep dive. Let's discuss the workflows, and also demonstrate how our tool TestComplete is able to satisfy those use cases. All right, so this is a very typical workflow. You have a set of requirements. You have test cases that map to those requirements. And then you have your automation tests that map to those tests that you just created. And then you have a CI tool and a reporting aspect that then closes the loop. Right? So at the first stage, we have probably the most popular tool for requirements. It's Jira, right? So you are in your Jira environment, you define your requirements in the form of stories and epics. Our tool Zephyr then allows you to stay in that Jira environment and map the manual test cases that you create with those requirements. All right, so you can simply define these test cases as an issue type, and we'll see how that's done in Jira, and then link them to your existing requirements. Then TestComplete comes in and links those manual test cases to the automated test cases that you define in TestComplete itself. So again, this is done in the most straightforward way possible. And then when you're ready to execute your tests, you simply call upon either your CI tool Or if you're not using one, you simply use TestComplete itself to execute your test. And once your tests are run, the results are sent back to Zephyr and back to Jira, where you have a full feedback loop now. So you have your automated test results linked to your manual tests, linked to your requirements, and once the execution is done, the results are sent back. And so you basically have a continuous learning and a continuous insights process, which many people look forward to, and something that as a product manager, something that I really like, because I know at every given point in time what is the status of a given requirement. All right, so let's see this in action, right? So I'm gonna switch over quickly to to TestComplete. I see a couple of questions. Maybe maybe before I switch to TestComplete, I can just quickly answer them. So one of the questions is TestComplete integrate with TFS? Yes, absolutely. TFS is now evolving into Azure DevOps. So yes, we do have an integration already. And in a couple of months, we're releasing our new version, which will have an even more tighter integration with Azure DevOps and TFS. So look forward to that. And I also see you integrate with TeamCity. Yes, our command line utility allows you to easily call TestComplete tests and gather the results and run through TeamCity as well. So yes. All right, so let's quickly move on to TestComplete. So just to remind everyone, the workflow that we're looking at is you start with Jira, you create your test cases in Zephyr, you create your automated tests in TestComplete, and then you run your tests through CI tool or through TestComplete itself and send the results back into Zephyr and Jira. So this is a very typical Jira environment, right? You have a bunch of projects. So today we'll be focusing on a project called TestComplete. The project TestComplete has just one epic called the SmartBear e-commerce store. Right? So as a product manager or owner, I create this epic with more details than this in most cases. What Zephyr for Jira does is that it helps you create test cases that you can then map back to those requirement to the epic that we just created. Right? So a simple issue type is added here called test, in addition to your more common ones, sort of stories, bugs, and epics. Right? So you create that test. You can simply link it to the story that the epic that we just created, and then you have your one-to-one mapping already, your first phase of your mapping. Right? So here I have about 6 test cases that I've defined, linked to the epic. Right? So let's consider that we've already completed our manual testing. We're happy, and now we're ready to automate those tests. So the first thing that we do here is establish a connection between TestComplete and Zephyr for Jira. So just taking a step back, TestComplete is a UI functional testing tool. Right? So it's a very rich tool with many functionality. It's used to test web, desktop, and mobile applications. So in this specific workflow, what we need to do is establish a connection with Jira and Zephyr. So we enter our credentials here, our access key and secret key, and we test the connection just to make sure that everything's okay, and it seems like it is. So what TestComplete does is simply brings in all the projects that has Zephyr associated with it in a dialog here that you can simply then choose to make the connection. Right. So one thing that I should mention is that that Zephyr also introduces the concept of cycles. So for each project, you can have different versions. The versions are written in through Jira itself. So you can have different versions for the project. And for each version, you can have cycles that Zephyr allows you to define. So in this case, I have 4 cycles. I have functional, regression, smoke, and ad hoc. Right? So these cycles can be categorized in any way. I just decided to do it this way. So back to TestComplete. So I've selected my project. Right? Now I have 4 versions, like we saw, that we defined in the Jira project. Right? For this case, I'll choose version 2.0. And we saw that we had 4 cycles. So TestComplete brings in all those cycles here that you can then choose. So for today's demonstration, let's just choose regression as the cycle that we want to work with. So this is the first step, right? So we established the connection. Now we know which projects, which version, which cycle that we need to connect to. The next step is to define the automation test itself, right? So we have many ways of creating tests. One of the ways is a simple keyword-driven framework. A keyword-driven framework essentially masks all the scripting and the coding and gives you a simple human-readable way of writing your automated test cases. So let's say I have a bunch of test cases that I've already created. Right? Now I'm ready to execute. Now I need to map these automated test cases to the manual test cases that we saw in Jira. So the way to do that is very, very straightforward. So we have a location in TestComplete called the test item panel or the execution plan. Right? So we essentially have a list of all the automated test cases. And to the far right, we have a column called link to external test. So we simply click on this ellipsis button, and TestComplete returns all the tests that you just created in Jira so that you can map them one-to-one. Very, very, very straightforward to use. So let's just check this out in real time, right? So I'm going to create a test now. So this is a live afternoon test. Description. And I'm going to link it to the epic that we created. So you already have a mapping there. We create this test. Now we come to TestComplete, and we create an automated test. I'm just going to call this afternoon test. And just for our demo today, I'm going to simply just log a message here. It's going to be an error because I want to show you how TestComplete is able to transfer the information from here into Jira so that you have one platform that you maintain all your test artifacts. So this is an error from TestComplete. I'm going to hit finish here. Now, as we saw, I go back to the test items panel. I drag the test that we just created in here, and I establish the link with the manual test. So I'm going to hit a quick refresh button here, and I see that that in real time, with the test that we just created appears here in TestComplete. So I'm going to hit finish, right? And now we're ready to run this test. Right? So you can either use a CI tool, as we spoke about, or simply just run it from TestComplete itself. We have a little button here that tells that you can instruct TestComplete to whether you want to report to Zephyr for Jira or not. Many times during your test creation phase itself, you do not want to keep sending information back into Zephyr. Once you're ready and done with your test and you're happy with it, then you simply click this button that tells TestComplete, hey, send the results to Zephyr for Jira. So I'm going to run this test here. All right, so on the far right, you can see that it's creating a Zephyr test execution. The test does nothing, but just report an error is coming in from TestComplete. Right, so here in the logs panel, we have an error, which is as expected, but we also have a message that the results have been published to Zephyr successfully. And so this is a simple summary of the test. So TestComplete has its own very neat summary that you can export as JUnit or send through email. You can print it out if you want to, or export as HTML. So let's go back to Zephyr to see what happened. So remember, we ran a test in the regression cycle. and the test was called live afternoon test, I believe. So let's wait for us to refresh, and here you can see that that Zephyr has been updated with a failure execution for this specific test. So if we dig in a little deeper, you can see that some of the results from TestComplete have been passed on here into Jira. So you have an error from TestComplete here, and usually if there's an image or an attachment that comes in with TestComplete, that is also updated here in this section. You can then create a bug right from here. So you're essentially creating a traceability from your requirement to your test case to your automation test to your bugs and then back to your requirements again. So you're maintaining a really nice continuous insights framework here. All right, so that's what I want to show with the first workflow. And I believe, Amy, there's one more poll that we want to launch right now.
Yep, I will go ahead and launch that. And we have a couple questions, so I think this might be a good place to answer those.
Sure. I see a question there right at the end. Where do you write the script? So TestComplete has its own IDE, which can take I think about 5 or 6 different scripting languages. JavaScript and Python are most common, but here you can see the IDE. You can simply write in a function here. It comes with its own IntelliSense and everything. So that's where you write the script. Can we map to Azure? Yes, you can. In a month or two, you're going to have this level of integration with Azure test cases. Right now, you still can work with it. There's a little bit of a workaround, but we have excellent documentation to show you how you can do that. All right, and this is an interesting question here. So, is there any intelligent updates available for easy maintenance when the locators change, right? So yes, that's exactly the reason why we introduced a concept called intelligent fix. So TestComplete will, if it identifies that a locator has changed, you can just scan the application and it'll tell you exactly which elements the locators have changed. And then you simply go and click on the update button to update to the new locator. So there's no extra maintenance. There's no digging that you need to do in order to in order to run your tests. All right. So let's move on. Thank you for answering that poll. All right. So let's go back to the presentation here. All right. So our second workflow is a BDD workflow, right? So you have your behavior-driven development methodology. So essentially what that means is that the 3 amigos in your team, your product person, so it could be a product owner or a product manager, a product analyst, works with the development and the quality assurance team to identify scenarios that from a user perspective that your application needs to behave like. So even before you start development, you want to make sure that everyone is on the same page, and you discover and formulate your feature files, as they call it. But once those are ready, you need to be able to automate those tests so that it can happen as a continuous thing, because you don't want to be manually testing each and every scenario. And once you automate the tests, you want to keep driving them through some continuous integration pipeline. So the tools that we have that satisfy this use case, again, if you're in Jira, we have a tool called HipTest that integrates directly with Jira, where you can define your Gherkin scenarios. So simple given, when, then statements, you can define them with HipTest. It's a SaaS-based platform that you can work with the rest of your team, and everyone can collaborate on that. And then once you're ready with that, you simply import those feature files and scenarios into TestComplete, and TestComplete takes care of your automation aspects, and we'll see how that's done. All right, I'm gonna quit this project because we don't need that anymore. but I'm going to create a new one here, and there is an option called BDD files here. Now, it is optional because every project does not need to be BDD, but in case you do, hit the BDD checkbox here. There's three ways you can get started with BDD and TestComplete. One is to simply import a project from HipTest. HipTest, we basically call in the HipTest API, and it returns all the projects along with all the feature files that you've defined there. The other way of doing it is if you already have feature files defined that you have stored in Git or some local repository as feature files, you can simply just import them here, and TestComplete takes care of the rest. But in case you haven't, in case you don't have any of these feature files and you want to start fresh, you can simply create a new feature file in TestComplete itself. For the demo today, we'll simply import a local feature file that I've already created. So my feature is very, very straightforward. It's testing just one scenario of our SmartBear website. So we just want to simply validate the TestComplete web page. So my scenario here is given that the SmartBear website is open. When I navigate to the TestComplete page, then the TestComplete page should be successfully loaded. Very simple, high-level test that we recommend any scenario should be written at. So one thing that TestComplete does is automatically convert this feature file into step definitions with an empty template that then you can fill in with your automation tests. I just want to mention that everything that you see here is based on Cucumber principles. So anything from tagging to parameterization to example tables, Gherkin tables, different languages, everything is supported out of the box. So there's two ways of creating tests. One is something that we use for if we've already been practicing BDD for a long time, we simply just write our tests manually here inside each one of these functions. The second way of doing it is if you're not too comfortable scripting, you can simply right-click here and say record this routine, and TestComplete transforms into a recording mode that then you're able to record all the steps that is required. So let's see how that's done. So I'm just going to close this. We don't need this. So this is the SmartBear website, and I'm just going to follow the steps here. So I'm going to hit record this routine. Right, so what TestComplete does, takes a couple of seconds and then switches to recording mode. And the cool thing here is that it tells you what step you need to record. So here you see, given that the SmartBear website is open. So a good, easy way to check that is to add a checkpoint from TestComplete. The checkpoint, essentially what I'm going to do here is just validate whether the SmartBear logo exists or not on the page, because that gives us enough information to make sure that we're actually on the SmartBear website. So this is a powerful aspect of TestComplete where it generates all the different properties of the element that was just highlighted there. So here we have a property called exists. So I'm going to choose that and hit finish. There is a next step button here. I'm going to hit that. So that means TestComplete is going to move on to the next step in my BDD process. So when I navigate to the TestComplete page, so I'm going to hit products and TestComplete. I'm going to wait for it to load. I've completed this step as well. So I'm going to hit next step again. And so the final step is a then statement. Then the TestComplete page should be successfully loaded. Again, a simple checkpoint just to make sure that the H1 tag is as expected. So easiest to use UI automation tool with artificial intelligence. So by default, it's looking for the content text. So that's what I want. So I'm going to hit finish here and stop my recording. And the cool thing here is that TestComplete automatically maps those steps to those individual step definitions there under the given, when, then statements. The cool things that come out of the box of TestComplete is that you have snapshots. So you can see here that the items that you're interacting with are highlighted. It's pretty cool. So it gives you a not so technical user easier way of understanding what exactly happened. So everything from tags to hooks and anything that you see in your essential Cucumber way of doing things is supported here out of the box. Now I simply can run either all the scenarios or a specific scenario. So in this case, we only have one scenario, so I can just run one scenario. If I have tags defined, for example, I can have tags at the scenario level, right? So I simply have a tag called tag1 here. And so I can run the tests by their tags as well. And so this works really easily, straightforward out of the box. And then I can use the CI tool to either run by tags or to run by specific scenario or all the scenarios. So a couple of things I want to mention here. The feature that you see here is language agnostic. So it doesn't matter what language in TestComplete you use. Without any external plugins or configurations, TestComplete is able to simply convert these feature files and execute them as automated tests. All right, I think it's time for our third poll, I think, Amy?
Yep, I've just launched it, and maybe we can take a second and answer a few more questions.
Ooh, I see a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's start from the top because I've been ignoring that. So does TestComplete support Apple testing? For example, Safari. We do support Apple testing. We support iOS applications. But unfortunately, with Safari, because it's a little hard to work with, we do not support Safari directly. But we do have our own browser that follows the Safari principle, so WebView. So you can use that to test Safari. All right. Similar to Jira and TestComplete integration, does TestComplete support integration with DevOps as well? So I assume that's Azure DevOps. So I'm going to say yes. It is not exactly similar, but it's very, very, it follows the same way of integration. All right, I'm just going to read through some other questions here. Okay, is there a plan to support scripts written in different languages in a single TestComplete project? As of now, no. You can have different scripts in your project suite level. So yeah, we have another level higher than the project. You can have project suite, multiple projects inside them, and each project can have its own individual scripting language. All right. So what language is used for step definitions in this example? It was JavaScript right there. Can we test in the BDD paradigm with a desktop application? Absolutely. The good thing about TestComplete is that it's application agnostic. So yes, if you have a desktop application, TestComplete works with it, with most desktop applications out there. So yes, you can run your BDD tests in just the way that we showed with desktop applications and mobile applications and packaged applications as well. All right, I'm going to move on now. So finally, the third aspect that I want to talk about is testing complex web applications. Right, so some applications usually have a mix of regular elements, that's regular HTML elements. And in this example, I want to show you canvas-based elements. So many modern HTML5 frameworks have canvas-based elements because it's just easier and just prettier to look at. So the problem there, unfortunately, is that there is no property associated with those canvas-based elements. So let's look at an example. So this is a very typical example that we have, right? So we have some content. This is a Tableau application. The test case here is validate that the total population is equal to this value. All right, so I'm going to start a fresh project here so that it's easier to follow this. All right. So in order to understand how TestComplete interacts with an object, we use something called the object spy. So with the object spy, TestComplete is able to break down this complex application into its smaller parts. So let's first highlight on this text here, total population. Right, so the easiest and the best way to interact with this is by its text itself, right? So TestComplete here, fortunately, is able to work with this, and it's able to retrieve the content text of this property because it is defined as a text node. It's a regular HTML element. Now let's spy on the number itself here, right? So we're looking for the number here, 66 million. So I'm going to look for 66. Unfortunately, TestComplete's not able to see this, and nor will any other tool because it's defined as a canvas element. It's drawn on the screen. So I look for different things with text, but I'm not able to get it. And what happens is we're not able to identify those elements, and we have to resort to flaky image-based tests. But with TestComplete, we introduced a new concept, I think about 6 months ago, and this is an OCR concept that's powered by AI capabilities, and the AI essentially just enables you to recognize those elements in the most robust and reliable way possible. So let's see how that works, right? So I do the same thing. So in this case, now I'm going to highlight the entire section. All right, and I'm going to see how TestComplete recognizes that. So before we saw that the text was not visible. So right now what we do is we just took a simple snapshot of this, and TestComplete simply gives us the text values from the image that we just saw. So now this is not image-based testing, but essentially we're extracting the text from the little section that we took out there. And once we hit finish, we've just set a checkpoint. So now you can actually validate that the value is as expected. There are other cases where you have certain elements that you want to interact with. So let's take, for example, this election results by political parties section here. So you have a bunch of text. The use case here is, or the test case here is to click on Democrat Party and validate that the graph has changed. So the toughest part here is to be able to click on the element. You can see here that we're not able to break into its individual elements at this level. So all we do is use an OCR action to simply take a snapshot of that section and then use our AI capability to extract all the text from it. So you can see here that that the accuracy is 100%, right? And so all I need to do is simply highlight the text that I want to work with. Then you have multiple actions that you can perform on it. So in this case, we want to perform a simple click, but you also have other options. If it's a text box, for example, you select a label and you want to send keys, you want to type into the text box. So you can do that. You can click next to a specific item where sometimes you need to click on a radio button, for example. Right, so you click on it and you hit finish. And just to quickly see how that works, I'm just going to run this specific operation. So we load the page and we go and click on it. So you can see that it's extremely reliable and it works all the time. So as we look at the image itself here, you can see that we've identified the Democrat Party and clicked on it successfully. So that's one way of interacting with complex applications. And we also have another aspect of the shadow root, which also works in the same way, but shadow root does not require OCR. We're able to work with it out of the box. All right, so we have another poll. No, we don't have another poll. So I'm just going to move on quickly and try to leave a couple of minutes at the end for more questions, right? So we saw how TestComplete works with some simple scenarios, some complex scenarios, some very typical scenarios. So let's look at a very high level what your automation strategy should look like, right? So the flexible test automation framework diagram that we saw, use that as a base for checking your boxes. Many times you might not need everything from an automation tool, but you will probably need most things. So make sure that you look at that and see which tool gives you the maximum number of features. Now, in most cases, one solution does not apply to 100% of your use cases. But the important part is that picking 100 tools is not a good idea either. Right? You might be very tempted to pick a tool for a specific use case, but then you end up with many, many tools in your portfolio, and then things become really hard to manage. And then invariably, after a year or two, you decide to deprecate a few of your tools. So make sure that that you select the optimum number of tools that you need. And the important thing is understand the limitations of the tool or set of tools you use. Map out a timeline and a roadmap for your test automation activities. You need to set a goal. Do not start on your journey because you have to. Make sure you map out a timeline so that you can keep going back and assess where you are. Leverage your existing assets. You probably already have some assets in your organization. Make sure that you're able to leverage some of that in order to get started with your journey. And finally, continuously measure success. So without measuring success, you might never end up reaching your goal. So you want to make sure that you're continuously aligning your work to the goal that you set up. So many times I get asked this question, right? I want to build my own framework. There's so many open source alternatives around. Why don't I build my own framework? I don't need everything that a tool offers. I just need something specific to my application, right? And I want to share with you something that happened to me. So as a QA engineer myself, a few years ago, I decided to build a framework myself. Right, I was tempted by the options available there, and being a young engineer, I wanted to go ahead and impress my boss and my company to build a framework. Right, and when I started building it, and 6 months after the process, I realized a couple of things. Right, the first thing is that it was an inefficient process. Right? We were not able to satisfy 100% of our use cases. Actually, we got to, I think, only about 50%. We spent 6 months for 3 resources. So what happened was that I started focusing on building the framework and not on automation itself. It was expensive. Right? I used resources, time. It was just an expensive process that I cannot account for, right? I did not pay to use any of the tools, but many times we forget that time is equal to money, right? So it was an expensive process. And it was very risky, right? I built an automation framework of what I think is right today, right? But application technologies are changing very often. And it's up to me to make sure that I keep updating it. Otherwise, I have the risk of missing out on some critical use cases. So it is a risky process, right? And then it occurred to me, right? The main reason we moved from manual testing to automation, right, was to avoid these 3 problems, right? Manual testing is inefficient, expensive, and risky. And I found that building my own framework also was inefficient, expensive, and risky. So I want to end by just talking at a very high level what we do with TestComplete on a day-to-day basis and how we decide on what features to build. Right. So there's essentially 3 themes with anything that we develop, and these 3 themes we think align to your needs and your jobs to be done. So the first thing is object recognition and supporting new controls. Right, technology is evolving every day. Your developers are looking to use the latest tech out there. So we totally understand that. So we try to keep up with the game. We talk to customers like you. We talk to prospects where we understand where the market's going. And we understand that object recognition is probably the most critical thing when it comes to automating at the UI layer. And then we try to make it as easy as possible to create, maintain, and execute your test cases, introducing simple things like record and playback, keyword-driven frameworks, intelligent fixes for your maintenance activities, able to scale your tests to the cloud. These are some things that we make it easy. Now, you might be able to do it by configuring a lot of tools together, but we try to make that an easy process for you as much as possible for new and existing users. And finally, we try to integrate with your ecosystem. We don't want you to adapt to us, but we will adapt to you. So either we have out-of-the-box integrations that we saw, or we provide a method for you to use our REST API or command line interface to integrate with tools in your ecosystem. And with each primary theme, we also have secondary theme. Right? We believe in an open architecture. We don't want to get you locked into one specific tool. You will definitely have other tools that you need to use. So go ahead and use them, and we will work with those tools out of the box as well. User experience is important. Automation tools generally have a large, high learning curve, right? And that basically scares people away from getting into automation. So we try to make it easy for new users to get started with TestComplete, and we're trying to improve that every day. This is a very difficult process, to be very honest, but we try our best to make it as easy as possible to use. And finally, we do apply modern technology where it matters, right? If we're solving a specific problem, an object recognition problem, a self-healing problem, we do use some level of artificial intelligence and machine learning inside TestComplete to solve your problem. And we're dabbling on computer vision as well, and you would see some advancements in that in the next few months. All right, so finally to end, I just want to share with you what we test in TestComplete itself, right? So TestComplete testing tool needs to be tested as well, right? So we have about 20,000 automated tests across 180 physical and virtual machines. We test over 50 different technologies. Right? We cannot limit to just one because we serve a wide range of technologies. So there's 50 different technologies that contain 1,000 different controls. It's to think about buttons, labels, grids, combo box, list box for each one of those technologies. So we make sure that we test them so that when you test them, everything works out of the box. We test across 20 different environments. We test 30, more than 30 different external APIs. We saw a couple here. We saw an integration with Jira, integration with Zephyr, integration with HipTest. All these are external APIs that we test to make sure that everything works. We have our own internal APIs that we need to test. So we do tests at the API layer also, because some things just make sense to test at the API layer. So I asked my QA lead what he thought about TestComplete, right? And I want to share with you what he thinks, right? So he thinks that TestComplete is useful for both novice users, people just getting started with automation, as well as advanced programmers and the whole range of people in between. It provides record and playback and a keyword-driven framework in addition to scripting in JavaScript and Python. Right? And it gives the ability to use out-of-the-box libraries and a host of other inbuilt features and integrations for anything that you need to do related to automation. The important thing, though, is if something is not available out of the box, many times you're able to solve that issue in more than one ways. Now, that is the power of an open yet robust platform. And that is what I wanted to convey in the webinar today. So I just want to leave you with this. Focus on testing your application. Leave the framework building to us, because that's what we do day in and day out. All right, so I think we have a minute or two, and I have a bunch of questions here. So I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. And Amy, do we have a poll?
Yep, I'm going to launch the last poll right now. So we'd really appreciate if you would take this. Thank you.
All right, so a couple of questions around the OCR functionality. So that's interesting. So any requirement on resolution of image to correctly retrieve the text from canvas? In most cases, no. We obviously recommend having a decently high resolution, but there should be no problem at all. Does TestComplete work with asynchronous JavaScript applications? Absolutely yes, because all we do is interact at the UI level. So as long as we're able to see the element, interact with it, there should be no problem at all. The OCR functionality is available in different fonts and languages. I think we have about 50 different languages that we support, and all the fonts available out there. Like I said, this is powered through some AI capability that's coming in from Google. So we have a backing of hundreds and millions of data points that's powering this feature. So yes. How much more time do we have, Amy?
I think just a couple more minutes. We're tight on time today.
All right. When defining the steps in a feature file, the existing step definition does not show up, similar to other frameworks. So I'm wondering what that means, because what TestComplete does is once you write your feature file, once you write your scenario and your Gherkin steps, you simply click a button to generate your step definitions file. So that should work pretty much out of the box. All right. How do we handle a dynamic value in a table through OCR? So OCR is not the best method to handle if your text is going to be dynamic. So we encourage you to use a property-based method there, unless you know the value ahead of time itself. And I think that's all we have time for. But I hope I was able to convey the power of TestComplete and the different features that's available out of the box. I'm happy to answer any other questions via email. So thank you once again, and Amy.
Yep. Thank you, Prashant, for sharing this with us today. And we apologize for going just a couple minutes over. Thank you very much for staying. We appreciate you guys taking the time out and joining us today. And just as a reminder, we will be sending a recording out within the next couple days. So you'll be able to take a look at the workflows and demos again. And yeah, I think that's it. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.